Hello and welcome to India Reads. My name is Pradeep, and we are now reading My Experiments with Truth by Mahatma Gandhi. We've already covered a first part of this book. I'm breaking it down into parts that I can fit in a period of 25 minutes so that the videos don't get too long. Um, let's start with my part number 2. But though I was none the worse for having neglected exercise, I'm still paying the penalty for another neglect. I do not know where I got the notion that a good handwriting was not a necessary part of education, but I retained it until I went to England. When later, especially in South Africa, I saw the beautiful handwriting of lawyers and young men both born and educated in South Africa, I was ashamed of myself and repented of my neglect. I saw that bad handwriting should be regarded as a sign of imperfect education. I tried later to improve mine, but it was too late. I could never repair the neglect of my youth. Let every young man and woman be warned by my example and understand that a good handwriting is a necessary part of education. I am now of opinion that children should be taught first the art of drawing before learning how to write. Let children learn Let the child learn his letters by observation as he does different objects such as flowers, birds, etc. And let him learn handwriting only after he has learned to draw objects. He will then write a beautifully formed hand. Two more reminiscences from my school days are worth recording. I had, I'm sorry about this. I had lost 1 year because of my marriage, and the teacher wanted me to make good the loss by skipping a class, a privilege usually allowed to industrious boys. I had therefore only 6 months in the third standard and was promoted to the fourth after the examinations, which are followed by a summer vacation. English became the medium of instructions. English became the medium of instruction in most subjects from the fourth standard. I found myself completely at sea. Geometry was a new subject in which I was not particularly strong, and the English medium made it still more difficult for me. The teacher taught the subject very well, but I could not follow him. Often I would lose heart and think of going back to the third standard, feeling that the packing of 2 year studies into a single year was too ambitious. But this would discredit not only me but also the teacher, because counting on my industry he had recommended my promotion. So the fear of the double discredit kept me at my post. When, however, with much effort, I reached the 13th proposition of the elucid, the utter simplicity of the subject was suddenly revealed to me. A subject which required only a pure and simple use of one's reasoning powers could not be difficult. Ever since that time, geometry has been both easy and interesting to me. Sanskrit, however, proved to be a harder task. In geometry, there was nothing to memorize, but whereas in Sanskrit, here it said Sanskrit, I guess it's a mistake, I thought everything had to be learned by heart. The subject also commenced from the fourth standard. As soon as I entered the sixth standard, I became disheartened. The teacher was a hard taskmaster, anxious as I thought to force the boys. There was a sort of rivalry going on between the Sanskrit and the Persian teacher. The Persian teacher was lenient. Boys used to talk among themselves that Persian was very easy, and the Persian teacher was very good and considerate to the students. The easiness tempted me, and one day I sat in the Persian class. The Sanskrit teacher was grieved. He called me by his side. How can you forget that you are a son of a Vaishnava father? Won't you learn the language of your own religion? If you have any difficulty, why not come to me? I want to teach you students Sanskrit to the best of my ability. As you proceed further, you will find in it things of absorbing interest. You should not lose heart. Come and sit again in the Sanskrit class. The kindness put me to shame. I could not disregard my teacher's affection. Today I cannot but think with gratitude of Krishna Shankar Pandya. For if I had not acquired the little Sanskrit that I had learned then, I would have found it difficult to take any interest in our sacred books. In fact, I deeply regret that I was not able to acquire a more thorough knowledge of the language, because I have realized that every Hindu boy or girl should possess sound Sanskrit learning. It is now my opinion that all Indian curricula of higher education there should be a place for Hindi, Sanskrit, Persian, Arabic and English, besides of course the vernacular. The big list need not frighten anyone. If our education system were more systematic, then boys free from the burden of having to learn their subjects through a foreign medium, I am sure all these languages would not be a irksome task but a perfect pleasure. A scientific knowledge of one language makes knowledge of the other languages comparatively easy. In reality, Hindi, Gujarati, and Sanskrit may be regarded as one language, and also Persian and Arabic also as one. Though Persian belongs to the Aryan and Arabic to the Semitic family of languages, there is close relationship between the Persian and the Arabic as both claim their full growth through the rise of Islam. Urdu I have not regarded as a distinct language because it has adopted the Indian language and its vocabulary is mainly Persian and Arabic, and he who would learn good Urdu must learn both Persian and Arabic, as one who would learn good Gujarati, Hindi, Bengali or Marathi must learn Sanskrit. The next part, which is tragedy. Amongst my few friends at high school, I had at different times two who might be called intimate. One of these friendships did not last long, though I never forsook my friend. He forsook me because I made friends with the other. The later friendship I regard as a tragedy in my life. It lasted long. I formed it in the spirit of a reformer. The companion was originally my elder brother's friends. They were classmates. I knew his weaknesses, but I regarded him as a faithful friend. My mother, my eldest brother, and my wife warned me that I was in bad company. I was too proud to heed my wife's warning, but I dared not to go against the opinion of my mother and elder brother. Nevertheless, I pleaded with them, saying, I know he has the weaknesses that you attribute to him, but you do not know his virtues. He cannot lead me astray, but my association with him is meant to reform him. For I am sure that if he reforms his ways, he will be a splendid man. I beg you not to be anxious on my account. I do not think this satisfied them, but they accepted my explanation and let me go my way. I have since I have seen since that I calculated wrongly. A reformer cannot afford to have close intimacy with him whom he seeks to reform. True friendship is an identity of souls rather rarely to be found in this world. One only between like natures can friendship be altogether worthy and enduring. Friends react on one another. Hence, in friendship, there is little scope for reform. I am of opinion that all exclusive intimacies are to be avoided, for a man takes in vice far more readily than virtue, and he who would be friends with God alone must remain alone or make the whole world his friend. I may be wrong, but my effort to cultivate an intimate friendship proved a failure. A wave of reform was sweeping all over Rajkot at the time when I came across this trend. He informed me that many of our teachers were secretly taking meat and wine. He also named many well-known people of Rajkot as belonging to the same company. There were also, I was told, some high school boys among them. I was surprised and pained. I asked my friend the reason and he explained it as thus. We are a weak people because we do not eat meat. The English are able to rule over us because they are meat eaters. You know how hardy I am and how great a runner too. It is because I am a meat eater. Meat eaters do not have boils or tumors, even if they sometimes appear to have any. These heal quickly. Our teachers and our distinguished people who eat meat are no fools. They know its virtues. You should do likewise. There is nothing like trying. Try and see what strength it gives. All these pleas on behalf of meat eating were not advanced at a single setting. They represent the substance of a long and elaborate argument which my friend was trying to impress upon me from time to time. My elder brother had already fallen. He therefore supported my friend's argument. I certainly looked feeble bodied by the side of my brother and his friend. They were both hardier, physically stronger, and more daring. This friend's exploits cast a spell over me. He could run long distances and extraordinarily fast. He was an adept in high and long jumping. He could put up with any amount of corporal punishment. He would often display his exploits to me, and as one is always dazzled by what one sees in others, the qualities that he lacks himself, I was dazzled by this friend's exploits. This was followed by a strong desire to be like him. I could hardly jump or run. Why should I not be as strong as he? Moreover, I was a coward. I used to be haunted by the fear of thieves and ghosts and serpents. I dare not stir out of doors at night. Darkness was a terror to me. It was almost impossible for me to sleep in the dark, as I would imagine ghosts coming from one direction, thieves from another, and serpents from a third. I could therefore I could not therefore bear to sleep with a light in the room, without a light in the room. How could I disclose my fears to my wife, no child, but already at the threshold of youth, sleeping by my side? I knew that she had more courage than I, and I felt ashamed of myself. She had no fear of serpents and ghosts. She could go out anywhere in the dark. My friend knew all these weaknesses of mine. He would tell me that he could hold in his hand live serpents, could defy thieves, and did not believe in ghosts. All this was, of course, the result of eating meat. A doggerel of Gujarati poem Narmad was in vogue amongst us schoolboys as follows: Behold the mighty Englishman, he rules the Indians small. Because he's a meat eater, he's 5 cubits tall. All this had its due effect on me. I was beaten. It began to grow on me that meat eating was good, that it would make me strong and daring, and that if the whole country took to meat eating, the English could be overcome. A day was therefore thereupon fixed for the beginning of the experiment. It had to be conducted in secret. The Gandhis were Vaishnavas, my parents were staunch Vaishnavas. They would regularly visit the Haveli. The family had had its own temples. Jainism was strong in Gujarat and its influence felt everywhere and on all occasions. The opposition to and abhorrence of meat eating that existed in Gujarat among the Jains and Vaishnavas were to be seen nowhere else in India or outside with such strength. These were traditions in which I was born and bred, and I was extremely devoted to my parents. I knew the moment they came to know of my having eaten meat, they would be shocked to death. Moreover, my love for truth made me extra cautious. I cannot say that I did not know that should have to deceive my parents if I began eating meat. But my mind was bent on reform. It was not a question of pleasing the palate. I did not know that if I had if it had particularly good relish. I wanted to be strong and daring and wanted my countrymen to be such, so that we might defeat the British and make India free. The word Swaraj I had not yet heard, but I knew what freedom meant. The frenzy of reform blinded me, and having ensured secrecy, I persuaded myself that mere hiding the deed from my parents was no departure from the truth. A tragedy continued. So the day came, it was difficult fully to describe my condition. There were on one hand the zeal for reform, and the novelty of making a momentous departure in life. There was on the other the shame of hiding like a thief to do this very thing. I cannot say which of the two swayed me more. We went on search of a lonely spot by the river, and there I saw for the first time in my life meat. There was baker's bread also. I relished neither. The goat's meat was tough as leather. I simply could not eat it. I was sick and had to leave off eating. I had a very bad night afterwards. The horrible nightmare haunted me. Every time I dropped off to sleep, it would seem as though a live goat were bleeding inside me, and I would jump up full of remorse. Then I would remind myself that meat eating was a duty, and so become very cheerful. My friend was not a man to give in easily. He now began to cook various delicacies with meat and dress them neatly. And for dining, no longer was the secluded spot on the river chosen, but a state house with its dining hall and tables and chairs, about which my friend had made arrangements in collusion with the chief cook there. The bait had its effect. I got over my dislike for bread, forswore my compassion for goats, and became a relisher of meat dishes, if not of meat itself. This went on for about a year. But for more than half a dozen meat feasts were enjoyed and all, because the state house was not available every day, and there was obvious difficulty about frequently preparing expensive savory meat dishes. I had no money to pay for this reform. My friend had therefore always to find the wherewithal. I had no knowledge where he found it, but find it he did. And because he was bent on turning me into a meat eater, but even his means must have been limited, and hence these feasts had necessary to be few and far between. Whenever I had an occasion to indulge in these surreptitious feasts, dinner at home was out of question. My mother would naturally ask me to come and take my food and wanted to know why I did not wish to eat. I would say to her, I have no appetite today, there is something wrong with my digestion. It was not without compunction that I devised these pretexts. I knew I was lying and lying to my mother. I also knew that if my mother and father came to know of my having become a meat eater, they would be deeply shocked. This knowledge was gnawing at my heart. Therefore, I said to myself, though it is essential to meat eat and also essential to take up food reform in the country, yet deceiving and lying to one's father and mother is worse than not eating meat. In their lifetime, therefore, meat eating must be out of question. When they are no more and I have found my freedom, I will eat meat openly, but until that moment arrives, I will abstain from it. This decision I communicated to my friend, and I have never since gone back to meat. My parents never knew that two of their sons had become meat eaters. I abjured meat out of the purity of my desire not to lie to my parents. Did not abjure the company of my friend. My zeal for reforming him had proven disastrous for me, and all the time I was completely unconscious of the fact. The same company would have led me to faithlessness to my wife. but I was saved by the skin of my teeth. My friend once took me to a brothel. He sent me in with the necessary instructions. It was prearranged. The bill had already been paid. I went into the jaws of skin, but God, in His infinite mercy, protected me against myself. I was almost stuck blind and dumb in this den of vice. I sat near a woman on her bed, but I was tongue tied. She naturally lost her patience with me and showed me the door with abuses and insults. I then felt as though my manhood had been injured and wanted and wished to sink into the ground for shame. But I have ever since given thanks to God for having saved me. I can recall four more similar incidents in my life, and most of them my good fortune rather than any effort on my part saved me. From a strictly ethical point of view, all these occasions must be regarded as moral lapses, for the carnal desire was there, and it was as good as the act. But from an ordinary point of view, a man who is saved from physically committing sin is regarded as saved. And I was saved only in that sense. There are some actions from which an escape is God sent both for man who escapes and for those about him. Man, as soon as he gets back to his consciousness of right, is thankful to the divine mercy for the escape. As we know that a man often succumbs to temptation, however much he may resist it, we also know that providence often intercedes and saves him in spite of himself. How that happens, how far a man is free, and how far a creature of circumstances, how far free will comes into play, and where faith enters into the scene, all this is a mystery and will remain a mystery. But to go on with the story, even this was far from opening my eyes to the viciousness of my friend's company. I therefore had many more bitter draughts in store for me, until my eyes were actually opened by an ocular demonstration of some of his lapses, quite unexpected by me, but of them later as we are proceeding chronologically. One thing I must, however, mention as it pertains to the same period. One of the reasons of my differences with my wife is undoubtedly the company of this friend. I was both a devoted and a jealous husband, and this friend fanned the flame of suspicion about my wife. I could never doubt his veracity, and I have never forgiven myself the violence of which I have been guilty of in often having pained my wife on acting of this information. Perhaps only a Hindu wife would tolerate these hardships, and that is why I have regarded woman as an incarnation of tolerance. A servant wrongfully suspected may throw up his job, a son in the same case may leave his father's roof, and a friend may put an end to relationship. A wife, if she suspects her husband, will keep quiet, but if her husband suspects her, she is ruined. Where is she to go? A Hindu wife may not seek divorce in law court. Law has no remedy for her, and I can never forget or forgive myself for having driven my wife to that desperation. The canker of suspicion was rooted out only when I understood Ahimsa in all its bearings. I saw the glory of brahmacharya and realized that the wife is not a husband's bond slave, but his companion and his helpmate, an equal partner in all his joys and sorrows, as free as the husband to choose her own path. When I think of these dark days of doubts and suspicion, I am filled with loathing for my folly and my lustful cruelty, and I deplore my blind devotion to my friend. Here is explained. Ahimsa means literally not hurting, non-violence. Brahmacharya means literally conduct that leads one to God. Its technical meaning is self-restraint, particularly the mastery over the sexual organ. Stealing and atonement. I still have to relate some of my failings during this meat eating period and also previous to it, which date from before my marriage or soon after. A relative and I became fond of smoking, not only where we saw any good in smoking or were enamored by the smell of cigarette, we simply imagined a sort of pleasure in emitting clouds of smoke from our mouths. My uncle had the habit, and when we saw him smoking, we thought we should copy his example. But we had no money, so we began to pilfer stumps of cigarettes thrown away by my uncle. The stumps, however, were not always available and could not emit much smoke either. So we began to steal coppers from the servants' pocket money in order to purchase Indian cigarettes. But the question was where to keep them. We could, of course, not smoke in the presence of elders. We managed somehow for a few weeks on these stolen coppers. In the meantime, we had heard that stalks of a certain plant were porous and could be smoked like cigarettes. We got them and began this kind of smoking. But we were far from being satisfied with such things as these. Our want for independence began to smart. It was unbearable that we should be able to do anything without our elders' permission. At last, in sheer disgust, we decided to commit suicide. But from but how were we to do it? From where were we to get the poison? I heard that the datura seeds were an effective poison. Off we went to the jungle in search of these seeds and we got them. Evening was thought to be the auspicious hour. We went to Kedarji Mandir, put ghee in the temple lamp, had the darshan and looked for a lonely corner. But our courage failed us. Supposedly we were not instantly killed. What was good of killing ourselves? Why not rather put up with the lack of independence? But we swallowed 2 or 3 seeds nevertheless. We dared not to take more. Both of us fought shy of death and decided to go to Ramji Mandir to compose ourselves and to dismiss the thought of suicide. I realized that it was not easy to commit suicide as to contemplate it, and since then, whenever I've heard of somebody threatening to commit suicide, it has had little effect on me. The thought of suicide ultimately resulted in both of us bidding goodbye to the habit of smoking stumps of cigarettes and of stealing the servants' coppers for the purpose of smoking. Ever since I've grown up, I've never desired to smoke and have always regarded the habit of smoking as barbarous, dirty, and harmful. I've never understood why there is a rage for smoking throughout the world. I cannot bear to travel in a compartment full of people smoking, I become choked. But much more serious than this theft was the one I was possibly guilty of a little later. I pilfered the coppers when I was 12 or 13, possibly less. The other theft was committed when I was 15. In this case, I stole a bit of gold out of my meat-eating brother's armlet. The brother had run into a debt of about 25 rupees. He had on his arm an armlet of solid gold. It was not difficult to clip a bit out of it. Well, it was done and the debt cleared, but this became more than I could bear. I resolved never to steal again. I also made up my mind to confess it to my father, but I dared not to speak. But I did not dare to speak. Not that I was afraid of my father beating me, nor do I recall his ever having beaten any of us. I was afraid of the pain I should cause him. I felt that the risk should be taken and there could be no cleansing without a confession. I decided to at last write out the confession, to submit it to my father and ask his forgiveness. I wrote it on a slip of paper and handed it to him myself. In this note, not only did I confess my guilt, but I asked for adequate punishment for it, and closed with a request to him not to punish myself for my offence. Him to not I request to him to not punish himself for my offence. I also pledged myself never to steal in the future. I was trembling as I handed the confession to my father. He was then suffering from fistula and was confined to bed. His bed was a plain wooden plank. I handed him the letter and sat opposite the plank. He read it through and pearl drops trickled down his cheeks, wetting the paper. For a moment he closed his eyes in thought and then tore up the note. He had sat up to read. He again laid down. I also cried. I could see my father's agony. If I were a painter, I could draw a picture of the whole scene today. It is so vivid in my mind. Those pearl drops of love cleansed my heart and washed my sin away. Only he who has experienced such love can know what it is. As the hymn says, only he who is smitten with the arrows of love knows its power. And this was for me an object lesson in Ahimsa. Then I could read in it nothing more than a father's love. But today I know it was pure Ahimsa. When such Ahimsa becomes all embracing, it transforms everything it touches. There is no limit to its power. This sort of sublime forgiveness was not natural to my father. I had thought that he would be angry, say hard things, and strike his forehead. But he was so wonderfully peaceful, and this I believe was due to my clean confession. A clean confession combined with a promise never to commit the sin again, when offered before one who has the right to receive it, is the purest type of repentance. I know that my confession made my father feel absolutely safe about me and increased his affection for me beyond measure. Part 9. My father's death and my double shame. The time of which I am now speaking, is my 16th year. My father, as we have seen, was bedridden and was suffering from fistula. My mother, an old servant of the house, and I were his principal attendants. I had duties of a nurse which mainly consisted in dressing the wound, giving my father his medicine, and compounding drugs whenever they had to be made. Every night I massaged his legs and retired only when he asked me to do so or after he had fallen asleep. I loved to do this service. I do not remember ever having neglected it. All the time at my disposal after performance of the daily duties were divided between school and attending on my father. I would only go out for an evening walk either when he permitted me or when he was feeling well. There also, this was also the time when my wife was expecting a baby, a circumstance which I can see today meant a double shame for me. For one thing, I did not restrain myself as I should have done whilst as I was yet a student, and secondly, this carnal lust got the better of me what I regarded as my duty to study, and of what was even a greater duty, my devotion to my parents, Shravana having been my ideal since childhood. Every night, whilst my hands were busy massaging my father's legs, my mind was hovering about the bedroom, and that too at a time when religion, medical science, and common sense forbade sexual intercourse. I was glad to be relieved from this duty and went straight to the bedroom after doing obeisance to my father. At the same time, my father was getting worse every day. Ayurvedic physicians had tried their ointments, Hakims their plasters, and local quacks their nostrums. An English surgeon who had also used his skill. As a last and only resort, he had recommended a surgical operation, but the family physician came in the way. He disapproved an operation being performed at such an advanced age. The physician was competent and well known, and his advice prevailed. The operation was abandoned, and various medical medicines purchased for the purpose were of no account. I have an impression that if the physician had allowed the operation, the wound would have been easily healed. The operation would have also to be performed by a surgeon who was well known in Bombay, but God had willed otherwise. When death is imminent, who can think of the right remedy? My father returned from Bombay with all the paraphernalia of the operation, which were now useless. He despaired of living any longer. He was getting weaker and weaker until at last he had to be asked to perform the necessary functions in bed. But up to the last, he refused to do anything of the kind, always insisting on going through the strain of leaving his bed. The Vaishnavite rules about external cleanliness are so inexorable. Okay, I'm going to end this chapter here because I've already gone ahead of time. I know that there's an important thing coming, but it would be the right start for the next session. What do we have in this chapter? Uh, we've seen Mahatma Gandhi talking about the various sins or various mistakes, as he calls them. I think it all starts with his choosing of friends. He had made a choice of two friends. The first one left him when he went chose the latter, and the latter was not somebody whom his mother, his elder brother, or his wife approved. He did not care much about his wife's opinion, but he had a lot of respect for his mother and elder brother, and he convinced them that instead of the friend spoiling him, he would reform the friend, and that was a belief that he had very strongly for a very long time. But instead of him reforming his friend, the friend had convinced him on various things that went against the principles and the philosophy that he was brought up in. He was a Vaishnava, Gujarati Vaishnava, and they were strict vegetarians. He was brought up in Gujarat, where Jainism was very strong, and the concept of eating meat was not seen as a good thing. The friend kind of convinced him that meat eating would make him strong and hardy, and that he would be able to stand up to even the British. The British were ruling India because they ate meat. This was also something that Gandhi started to believe in, because he saw his friend being sturdy and manly, his brother who had already bought into the story being sturdy and manly, and he was the only feeble one out. So he decided that he would eat meat, and they had his friend had arranged for a special occasion, and had meat dishes prepared and brought it near the lake, where along with bread he was given meat. Gandhi could not digest it. He had a big distaste for it. He went back and felt very guilty. In the night, he had dreams of the goat bleating inside his stomach, and he decided that he would not do it again. But his friend was kind of very convincing. The friend convinces him that he should try again. Let's give it a shot again. And the friend this time did it in style. He had the state room prepared for him. He had delicious dishes, savory dishes prepared for him, and Gandhi slowly acquired the taste of meat. Obviously, Gandhi was very particular of following the truth and not lying or cheating, but here was a situation where he had to, if not lie, at least hide the truth. So there would be occasions, he did this for a year, and there would be occasions where he would have uh, a feast of meat dishes, come back home and not eat dinner, and therefore he had to lie to his mother that he did not have the appetite or was not feeling good, whereas actually that was not the truth. So this is something that he regrets and he wishes he had not done. uh, but I guess this went on for a year, and in the period of 1 year, he must have done this about quite a few times, because it was not that he did it too regularly, because his friend could not afford to arrange a feast of meat dishes for him, but he did it quite a few times, and then the idea of lying to his parents, the guilt of it, got on to Gandhi, and he decided that as long as his parents were alive, he would not eat meat, so that he would not have to lie to them. This was one part of it. The second part of it, for the same friend, took him to a brothel, and in the brothel, Gandhi was completely tongue tied. He did not know what to do, and obviously the lady kicked him out, and he sees it as an act of God rather than his restraint. He sees it as a good fortune rather than his deciding, or his willpower, which saved him. And he says that there were some 3 or 4 occasions later in his life where he had this good fortune, and he's thankful for the good fortune that saved him from what could have been a personal source of misery and embarrassment for him for the rest of his life. His guilt would have never left him uh, alone after that, and he's happy that nothing happened there, while he acknowledges that uh, his landing up in the brothel, or his wanting to do things, is equal to the desire of it, but he takes a practical approach, that since he had not physically committed the sin, or he had not physically done some of the things that he got tempted later, this he was in a way absolved of doing the sin actually. So this is the way he justifies to himself. And uh, uh, so basically, even after all these temptations that his friend gave, he did not realize that the mistake was on his part of accepting his friend and continuing with the friendship. He still believed that he had the ability to reform the friend, and that never happened. Apart from this, there was he and his cousin used to have this fascination to smoking after seeing their uncles who used to smoke in style, and they started picking on the stumps that his uncle used to throw down and try and smoke that. They realized that they could not do that, it wouldn't have much of cigarette left in it, so they started stealing the coppers from their servant and used to start buying cigarettes. And this again is something that he was not very proud of. Eventually he did give up on that, and later on in life, when he had the opportunity to experience and enjoy smoking and drinking, he never did that, and he considers it as a barbarous, dirty, and an act that he would not he would not do at all. Uh, uh, while the habit of stealing a few copper coins got onto him, he later had to uh, steal a portion, or take a portion of his brother's gold amulet to clear off certain debts. And this particular action of his, it was never known to anybody, and like his meat eating or smoking was never known to his parents, this also was not known to his parents, and his parents would never get to know that he had taken a part of his brother's gold amulet and sold and cleared off his debts. But this guilt of this particular stealing never left him, and he decided that he would confess to his father, and he would confess in all earnestness, and ask for adequate punishment for himself, and tell his father that he is owning up to his responsibility. But however, he could never physically go up to his father and tell him. His father was any which ways bedridden, suffering from fistula, and he did not want to upset his father, or he rather did not have the courage to go to his father. So he wrote down a letter of confession, and he gave it to his father. As father started reading it, he stood behind, standing in a plank, and there he could see his father having uh, breaking down and tears rolled down his cheeks, and this was a very moving moment for both the father and the son. The father having gone through it and appreciating the son for making a clean confession, and the son seeing that the father has accepted him despite his mistakes. It was a very moving bonding moment between father and son, and Gandhi sees this as something that would form a philosophy for him in the future. The concept of ahimsa. His father was not known to be a very non-violent guy, a peaceful guy, but the fact that he chose not to react and and taught Gandhi the most important lesson that he had learned in his life, the act of ahimsa, which is non-violence, that things could be forgiven, that life can go on without you reacting back on things which have gone wrong. And he sees this as one of his biggest learnings from his father, and he recollects the moment over and over again, and even as he writes, he remembers that moment very vividly. It's like a movie running in front of him, that he can vividly see and experience. When he thinks about it, he can experience how he felt at that point of time. uh, so apart from this, there is this last portion which obviously we have not completed. It has to do with his father, uh, almost on his deathbed. This is something that we will kind of take up in the next chapter, because a portion of it got cut off, and this is an important confession that he is making, and I would like to start the next chapter with it. But to just wrap up, I'd like to say that we need to remember that this book was written 95 years back. I stand corrected, I said 90 in the last video. This book was written 95 years back, and uh, the courage that such a great guy had to admit to all his faults, some like smoking and drinking or meat eating are not considered as vices now, but to be able to talk about him losing his way and going to a brothel, or some of the other things that he's going to talk about, the ability to come out so cleanly and write, put it on paper for future readers to read and judge and see him for who he is, good and bad, is such a great virtue. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to reread this book, and I hope that you guys can also pick up and appreciate these finer nuances of his real experiments with pouring out the truth of his life. Yeah. So that's about it from this section. We will see each other in another part with my experiments with truth, written by Mahatma Gandhi. Thank you very much, and please share your comments. Do hit the like button, and let me know if you want me to change anything. Thank you. Bye.